conversations pinned for a second. I'm not going to talk the whole period. This is about where we left off yesterday, where we have our dune background set up, and then we have our duck masked out as the next steps in our composition that we're creating here. If I control C and V, I can copy and paste this same layer. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. You can copy and paste any layer. The cool part about Photoshop is it's going to take all of the adjustments, all the masking, all the fun stuff that you applied to that image along with it. So if you wanted to have a second duck, which is important later in today, you can just copy and paste it and it'll bring the mask with it. So I'm going to, whoops, I deleted the mask. So I'm going to delete this layer. There's two ways you can do that, by either right-clicking and then going to delete layer. It's the fourth option. Or you can drag the layer down to the trash can, and that will remove it from the stack order. But what we're focusing on today are the palm trees and getting the more advanced selection of something that is harder to select with accuracy. The duck has nice hard edges, so it's easy for Photoshop to guess where you want the line to be drawn. But the palm trees are something that Photoshop is going to struggle with guessing a little bit more. So we're going to go to File and then Open. And you're going to open up your copy of palm trees cmyk.tiff. All right. And that's going to come in as a layer 0. This is not one that has a background. Typically, when you save an image as a TIFF file, it does not have the background lock default that a lot of the other raster types have, like JPEG or PNG. So just keep that in mind. Always want to be checking what type of file is coming into your Photoshop to make sure that it is what you're actually trying to do. So if you notice, you probably tried this yesterday if you were following Mr. Hendrick's videos. If you take your quick selection tool, which remember lives underneath this box, if you click and hold on the box, you'll get the quick selection tool. If I go to click on it, first it's going to tell me that I have to select a layer. So I'm going to make sure that my layer is kind of grayed out. It's got my little white frame around the edge here. If I try to select portions of the sky here, it's making pretty good guesses, but it's still leaving like a lot to be desired, right? So if we look at all of this, okay, let's try to get some of that down there. We're trying to generally, we want to keep the palm trees as part of our mask. So if I make a couple selections right here, trying to get the edge, maybe I will make my brush smaller with the bracket keys. I don't know, who's to say? Just keep clicking kind of around in the blue space. When you mask something out, the way that I was taught was that you want to select the things that you want to hide, and then you can bring the data back in with the black and white brushes on the mask layer. But anyways, that's why I'm clicking on the sky specifically as compared to the palm trees. But if I go to make my mask out of this, yikes. It actually selected the wrong parts, or quote unquote the wrong parts, not really the parts that I was wanting to hit. Hi, good morning, with my selection. So I have two options here. If you want to go about using the quick selection tool, you can invert your mask, which means you're going to flop the black and white values, where everything that is currently showing will be hidden and vice versa. Everything that is currently hidden will be shown. And to do that, one way you can do that is by clicking on your mask thumbnail, your little black and white situation right here, hold the control key and press I. What that's going to do is swap those white and blacks so that it, those whites and blacks, excuse me, it's going to invert it so that whatever you didn't select remains, which is what we were going for here. And now I could take my paintbrush tool and make sure it's set to white to make white windows. And I could paint some of this information back in if I really wanted to, but this is very tedious and I'm on a timeline. My client needs this stuff done sooner than later, right? So we're going to go back all the way back, Control Z, till we have our marching ants. We have our selection here on our palm trees. Another way to avoid inverting your mask is to invert your selection. So when you go have a selection made, that means anytime you have a line of marching ants or you have your kindergarten cutout happening around here, if you go up to the select menu, there's a couple different options at the top here that you're going to be using very frequently. And then the other ones are more advanced, which we'll get into later in Photoshop. But if you go to the select menu and you click on inverse, it's going to flop that selection. And instead of making this like, let me do, actually, let me pull up Illustrator real quick so I can make some quick shape diagrams. It'll take me just a sec. You don't have to do this. This is just for demonstration purposes. So if I had an Illustrator, let's imagine that this, once it creates, come on. So let's imagine that this is my Photoshop background. This is the whole size, just the black square, not the artboard. Okay. And I'm trying to make a red circle selection on the front here. If this has my line of marching ants, you're going to have to do a little imagining here. But you can imagine that the red circle are the palm trees that I've got going on here. If I go select inverse, what that's going to do is swap these two things like this. So then this is going to become all of my selected area, and then the background is going to instead, it basically just swaps the edge that you're cutting out. So if this is our original selection, our edge is pretty limited to the contains of our red circle. All of our palm trees live right here. This is the line of marching ants that is going to be cut out like it is on like a kindergarten cutout, right? This is our line of ants. If I invert my selection, it does this instead. So it flops the side to be, this is the part that's going to be cut out. It's going to go to the edge of the background and then ignore the part that you actually initially selected. This is something that will come with practice. It's not really the best way to do the tree selection that I'm about to show you, but I do want to have you or give you a visual of what that inverted selection can do. So by selecting the inverse, it's going to push select inverse. Actually, let me check and make sure I didn't. Yeah, I inverted an inversion. Let me do it one more time. Pretend I didn't do all those other ones. This is the first time I've selected the inverse. It's going to push the cutout line to the edge of the photograph. Photoshop works with only containing the document size you've opened. Illustrator, you got all that infinite space. Photoshop, you have that too in a way, but once it goes off of the bounds of like the pixel layers, it stops being visible and it stops functioning. So if I make my mask from the inverse, you can just see it's going to do the exact same thing as Control-I would on the mask there. But all that is to say, this is not the highest quality selection that we could make. We need to use some more advanced selection tools like the Select and Mask window. So if you don't see, sometimes there's a button, let me see, mine's not working for some reason. But sometimes when you've made a selection, or if you have a selection tool enabled, there it is, you'll see the Select and Mask button right here. You can also get to the Select and Mask by going to the Select toolbar in the top, and then going down to Select and Mask. And what that does is it opens up, you can see my workspace changed. It turned red and some of the tools disappeared in favor of some more specific selection tools. This is what will allow you to get those fine details in things like hair or fur or leaves or grasses or anything that kind of it blends together and has a less distinct line, bless you, than the sky and the sky and the water does. So to set up your documents, I'm actually going to go back here and Control-D to deselect, get rid of my ants. I can go straight into Select and Mask, and currently nothing is selected. So it's going to interpret the whole document here as what I want to look at. This second brush right here is specifically designed for things that are like strandy, right? That's going to be hair on a portrait if you're shooting with models. That is going to be fur on pets if you're doing pet photography, grass in the real world if you're trying, or more natural plant life that kind of has fronds or stems or things that are going to get mixed with the background because you can see through them. They're very small. It's a fine detail brush that we're going to click on right here. So the next thing you want to change is some of your, this is just so you can see best. You want to change your, where is it? Your view. You want to change that to on black, and you want to set the opacity to 100%. It's the same thing as the transparent overlay, but instead shows you what is going to be the black parts of your mask, the parts that are going to be concealed. These are going to become part of the background. So what I can do though, let's actually do, just kidding, let's do like a 65% so I can get a selection started. With this tool selected, you want to imagine, okay, let me just make a quick selection here on some of these palm fronds, focusing on the thing that I want to keep instead of the thing that I want to hide. You'll flip and flop between those two things. So I have initial selection here. Now when I go into select and mask, the parts that are full color are going to be visible, which is why if you set it to on black and 100% opacity, you can see what is going to be retained by your mask instead of hidden by default. So with this brush, this hairbrush looking tool, this second paintbrush with the R on your keyboard, the refine edge brush, you want to imagine that you're literally like brushing the hair of these trees, and you want to just pull it down. You can see it's going to really find those edges between that and the background. And you want to just click and drag along these palm trees until more of that information starts coming back in. So I'm just clicking and dragging very frequently. You can click OK to go back and see how your selection's looking. Okay, and then go back into select and mask. See how this is going here. This is not as working as well as I planned. Maybe there's a better way to do this. Let's see. Let's see what that looks like. Let me mask it out and then invert it. Okay. Let's do this instead. We're going to delete the mask. There's another selection tool that we're going to focus on instead because quick selection is not working the way that I want it to. So we're going to look at the magic wand tool for a second instead and switch gears again. Sorry, we're doing a lot of back and forth. But this one should work better because this is the way I've done it in the past. That's worked a lot more consistently. If you take your magic wand tool and you click in the blue space, it's going to make that same educated guess that the object selection tool makes based on pixels. A lot of blue information here though, so it's going to get a little bit confused. The magic wand tool, however, when you click in another area, is just going to swap its selection entirely. And since we don't want to do that, we want to try and get rid of as much of the sky as possible so that we can keep the trees. You want to hold shift and just kind of click around until you can see cutout lines on each of the trees. So you hold shift, get rid of all those extra ants hanging out around here in the beach, on the sand. I did too many, so we're going to Control Z. Clicking in between the fronds, you can see it's going to make this cutout line that happens right around the edge of the trees, fronds like this. So this is the way we've done it in the past because the magic wand tool is a lot more accurate, but it's also a little bit harder to get it precise. You can see we have our cutout line looking pretty good. Hi, good morning. Our cutout line looking pretty good around here. I'm going to go into select and mask now. And you can see this is a lot more of a refined selection here, with the trees being mostly turned into background, turned into invisible on here. But since this isn't what I want, I can go up here and go select inverse. And then when I click select and mask, the thing that gets left, the thing that remains are the trees. And this is where you can start to take that hairbrush tool and get rid of some of those excess blue pixels around the edges of your fronds here. So that the brush is going to know you go along the stem, brushing the hair of the palm fronds in this manner. Lots and lots of clicking to get rid of a lot of those blue pixels, but retaining some of that green information. This is why it's important to make these masks, because you have all of this green data that's maybe not the highest quality. Sometimes the client does not provide you with the best sort of work that you need to use for your, or the best work that could work for your, I cannot think today, sorry. That'll work for your scene. I'm going back to my regular brush to bring back some of this beach information because I do want to keep the hammock and the sea. I just want to remove the clouds. So if we look, if we zoom in, well, let me zoom in. Let me zoom in. Okay, it's fine. I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna paint away some of these blue pixels, and it's gonna really look for these fine edges like on the trunk and on the strap of the hammock, and look for that edge on the horizon of the sea here so that that turns black and becomes a better part of our mask. So when you click OK, you're going to leave select and mask and get left behind with this very accurate, very far more like refined selection than you would have previously had. So when you make your mask, it's just going to remove the background and retain a lot of that data that we were trying to hold on to here. What you'll do next, same thing we did with the duck, is Control C, go over to your Photoshop document, Control V. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Click on layer 0 before you Control C. Go back to GDp1, Control V. You can see that there's a hard pixel edge here, so we need to do a little bit of compositing to make this a bit more believable. So I'm going to put this hard edge over here, but if I go to resize it, it's going to scale evenly. It's going to be too zoomed in for what we're trying to do here. This is where you'll need to hold Shift to stretch out the palm trees, make them a little bit larger, so that they cover a majority of the front of your scene here, like this. And now we have some dunes in the background. We've got a sea in the foreground. You're thinking about the environment design as well. Focal points are going to be back here. Less important information is going to be back here. And now we can start to arrange our ducks, get them in a row, so to speak, so that they look believable, like one is on the beach and one is in the sea. So you notice if I bring my duck down below this beach layer, it gets hidden and it stops being visible after the bottom of the page here. Layer order is super duper important for Photoshop. But since we want a duck to be part of the water back here, we can leave this guy in this current layer order. Control C, Control V, bring this new duck in front of it so that it is able to sit on the beach after we resize it a little bit here. You can also go to image. So I'm going to commit my change there so I have access to actually the rest of my stuff here. I'm going to edit, transform, and I'm going to reflect it. Where's reflect? There we go. We're going to flip horizontal so that this duck's facing the other way. And we want to make both of these ducks seem like they belong here with a little bit more believability. Currently, it's too crisp. The ducks have no shadow. This duck is just randomly kind of scrapbooked into the side there. We want to make these things a little bit more believable, right? So to make the back duck, the sea duck, a little bit more realistic, let's see if we can do this. Let me do some arranging real quick. Kind of put this guy a little bit more in the background, center, back and forth. On my mask layer. Let me try something real quick. See what that does. Okay. I'm trying to make a hard edge here so that the duck looks like it's floating in the back of the water there. So that looks fine to me. This looks, I don't know why it's not turning out the way that I intended. I apologize. But we can make this duck right here look like it is sitting on the actual beach by using a shadow. So to make a shadow, if you imagine a shadow in real life, it's not 100% opaque 100% of the time. It's got a little bit of see-throughness. It's got a little bit of bounce happening because of the light. We could strategically place our duck in the shadow of the tree and make our lives a little bit easier. Or if you don't want that, you can put your duck more in the sun and this thing will work the same both ways. So this thing to actually make the shadow happen is we're going to create a new layer, which is the exact same button as it is in Illustrator right down here next to the trash can. But this creates a new blank pixel layer with no information on it. If you have auto select enabled, it's going to jump to whichever layer you have clicked on currently. But we want layer 4, which has nothing made. So if I were to go into select and mask on layer 4, in theory, select and mask, it's got nothing. It's just windows into the background. You can take your brush tool, and I saw some of you already working with this panel, so this is a great one. It's going to be one of your best Photoshop friends. If you click on this little like sun or star looking icon right here above the tab and next to this little folder icon with a brush, if you've got the brush tool activated, these are your brush settings. And we're going to use this to create a believable shadow that has some blurriness and different types of opacity and stuff like that so that it looks real here. Hardness is a measure of how much blur, because we have a circle here, it's got a radius, right, from the center to the edge. 100% hardness means 0% blur. It's kind of backwards. It means it's going to have a 100% hard edge with no blurring from the center along the radius. If we have a 0% hardness brush, that means 100% blur. It's going to be totally blurred, not blurred, but like very deliberately blurred from this side to the other side. So like if let me give you an example of that here. 100% hardness brush has no blur. So we're going to set this to red. It has 0 blur coming along the radius. So when I click, it's going to make a solid orange circle or red circle. No fun stuff happening along the edge there. If I take that same brush and I set it to a hardness of 0, you can tell the difference is pretty significant. This is the same exact color from the same exact brush, except this is being blurred 100% of the way from the center to the edge of the brush stroke. So this is your 2 amounts of hardness, and then I'll show you one that's about mid-range so you can get a better reference of how hardness affects the look of your brush. So 50% hardness, it's only starting to blur on the edge here as compared to all the way from the center. So I hope that makes sense, because what we're going to do is paint with a little bit of like a light black, a dark gray, which is the typical color of shadows in our earthly world, and look like this duck has a little bit of information going on underneath it so that it's casting light accurately. So when you're compositing, this is a concept art, environment design kind of thing. You want the shadows to happen believably. You want it to look like it is a photograph that you took instead of a photograph that you made. So if we look at the direction of the shadows in our current image, that means our light source is over here. So it's getting into some more like art territories with hatching and some shading stuff, because it does apply here as well. Our light source is over here because we're casting a pretty long shadow in this direction. So that means our shadow needs to be behind our duck the same way that the shadows are behind the trees. This is something that comes with time and practice. Just make sure that your light is going the same direction, because if it's not, you'll instantly be able to tell. On layer 4, with my brush set to a pretty, not that one. Oh, this is a selection brush, that's why. My brush set to a fairly soft number, like 10%, because low hardness means more softness. If I paint with a little bit of red back here, maybe along the contours of the duck, it's a little bit of a, brush is a little large. Go back, bracket keys to make them smaller. We're gonna paint what the shadow could look like underneath the duck. All right, if I put that under this layer, it's a little bit short because these shadows are quite long on the trees, so our shadow should be a little bit longer on the duck. Let me make it a little bit more of a shadow color. Double click, it's the same color picker as Illustrator. We're gonna go to kind of a shadowy, silvery, kind of gray right here, like this. Maybe turn my hardness up, actually down a little bit to like 7%, maybe like a little bit smaller. And we're gonna paint some shadow information on here. It doesn't quite look like a shadow yet. I can hear you thinking. I know, we still have one more adjustment to make. You just want to paint a little bit of this soft gray, kind of like one of these, so that it looks like your duck is casting a shadow. I did one more triangular shape because it has the triangular tip to the tail, and just kind of brought it back towards the center of the light blocking object in this manner. So this shadow is in front of this duck. This is some real Peter Pan situation we've got going on here. We're gonna take layer 4, put it underneath layer 3, and then the last thing we're gonna change on layer 4 is the opacity. Opacity is the measure of opaqueness, how much light something blocks or lets through. So if it's 100% opaque, it's completely solid. We're gonna add some translucence by turning that opacity down a little bit to give it the illusion that our duck is casting a shadow that we can manipulate. Maybe make it a little bit larger, maybe make it a little bit more opaque. Lots of fine adjustments when you're compositing something in Photoshop, like this. Once you've added the shadow to your duck, once you've added a second duck in the background, and once you've added the palm trees into the space here, this is what your 8.2 should look something like. You could change the color of this duck if you want to try and figure out how to do that. You can change some of you can add some additional things to the background, but this is all of the information that Mr. Hendricks and I are looking for as part of one of your first compositions in Photoshop here. We got about 20 minutes or so to finish this up as best you can. Yeah, and we'll just leave it at that. All right, thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it very much. Use the rest of this time wisely.